Hello, my name is Jason Paulisczak, and this is my presentation on the military versus nature. Serving in the military for many years, I've had the opportunity to travel the world to exotic locations and see various sights that many people take for granted or will never have the chance to see. From the mountains of the Pacific Northwest United States to the open deserts of Iraq, from the forests of the American East Coast to the valleys of Europe and everything between, nature is vast and beautiful but in constant conflict with man. Along with the natural beauty of the landscape come the inhabitants of these special places. Bald eagles, elk, whales, and sea lions on the coast, armadillos, snakes, catfish, and buzzards in the central plains, and hedgehogs, lizards, cranes, and camel spiders in the hot arid wastelands. For an advocate of wildlife, the world offers magnificent specimens in diverse and vivid environments, each ecosystem in a delicate balance with itself and with humankind. Along with population centers for people are areas that are used primarily by the military for various operations. At each of these locations, the servicemen and women interact with the environment, attempting to either coexist or conquer their surroundings. My first foray into this conflict came in North Carolina, where the forest where we trained was full of signs and warnings about disturbing the wildlife. And throughout my career, I have noticed more of the same or similar around the world. It motivated me to learn more about the delicate balance that was being maintained, and I knew my future would involve being a part of the debate. As the role of the planet's keepers grows, so do strong opinions on whether the actions of certain groups are acceptable. One such group that has been under pressure for those who claim to speak for the Earth is the United States military. Controlling large swaths of land and conducting destructive and dangerous missions within, the military has been accused of doing irreparable damage to the animals inhabiting the world, and has faced legal battles as the conflict continues. The military, in contrast, has claimed that the damage done is insignificant, that the government is doing enough to justify any damage caused. The opposing ideologies are in constant friction as one side fights to protect the planet, while the other side fights to protect the nation. The manner in which military operations are conducted is questioned on what operations are necessary, what improvements can be made, and are they acting in a responsible manner, to which the environmentalists answer no. There is no way a clear-cut case. It is possible to look at the issue scientifically and come to a more accurate conclusion. The actions of the United States military in training, though lacking in certain environments, overall does more to protect and enhance the environment than to cause destruction. Compared to the average use of the land, the military does more to protect it and its inhabitants than most other institutions within the United States of America. One way to impact the world, or at least the immediate area in this way, is to enter the field of wildlife management. Though a broad term, the basic blueprint of the discipline remains rooted in its very title. Whether it be documenting animals' population numbers, looking for growth or decline, or implementing control measures to alter or maintain current levels, wildlife management is a liaison between man and beast, acting as an advocate for the creatures that cannot speak for themselves. Taking many forms, wildlife management can include looking at the environment and trying to find the perfect conditions to accomplish a goal. Or it can involve the movement of species to areas that are out of balance and need additional predators or prey. Working for both public and private institutions, wildlife managers can also advise and educate in various capacities. They must be aware of not just the individual animals, but also nature itself, being experts in vegetation, landscapes, nutrition requirements, and food sources. The career field includes biologists, technicians, and conservationists, and work in a variety of capacities. Though the need for the occupation seems to be dwindling, there will always be a need for trained professionals that can examine, advise, and develop solutions to correct imbalances in nature, especially when man is evolved. With an annual salary in 2014 of around $37,000 to $64,000, it is by no means an occupation that prides itself on being a money market, but rather attracts those who truly care about the job and all it entails. Looking at all the many responsibilities of a wildlife manager, one may ask what wildlife management has to do with the military. Though the military has and does employ the use of domesticated animals such as horses, dogs, and in some cases, birds and marine animals, how does that relate to wild animals? In simplest terms, it has more to do with the friction between military and several environmental and animal protection groups. One may ask why this debate is so important for both sides. The answer comes from the basic goals of each opposing factor. The military must be able to fight and win our nation's wars around the world. In order to be able to do this, they must train. It does no good to train in situations that do not prepare the men and women who must fight. There's an old army adage, to train as you fight. This means that training must be conducted as realistically as possible in environments and situations that closely mirror those places that may be war zones in the future. Though a great deal of military operations take place in urban environments such as towns or cities, the majority of missions occur in rural environments around the world. A service member may have to fight in a variety of environments to include the air, on the water such as oceans, seas, or even lakes, and they must also be prepared to fight on land. The Earth's terrain varies drastically from arid deserts to humid rainforests, from snowy mountain peaks to plains and tundras without a human population for miles. In order to be effective, the military must experience training in all of these diverse landscapes to be properly prepared in case war comes. As a result, military property is always expanding to create larger simulated battle spaces to meet the requirements of evolving technology and strategy. And by expanding, military training encroaches on the territory of native species. Those charged with saving the planet and the species contained within can take some exception to this policy. Already there is evidence of mankind's negative influence on the world. Growing cities have forced suburbia to steal land from native animals, and when these animals stay in their changed environments, they are labeled as a nuisance and sometimes killed in order to protect the invading human species. Growing demand for human food and comfort sources have led to growing farms and shrinking forests globally, and the species that inhabit the land are being forced into smaller and smaller areas to try to survive, all while humans continue to ravage resources and make species extinction a more and more realistic concept every day. Along with the lack of resources come the after effect of a growing human population. Waste continues to build, as does pollution. The trees that act as a filter for the air are being torn down for lumber and space, and the rivers that feed nature are being diverted for human crops and polluted by industrial waste. The effects of global warming and continued destruction of the earth have been debated at many levels for decades, and a compromise has yet to emerge that satisfies the growth of mankind and the stabilization of nature and its inhabitants. The military is just one factor in this debate, but a heated one. As the military controls so much land, many environmentalists believe that the land must be protected, as well as the inhabitants of that land. While some environmentalists believe that this debate is insignificant and needless, others find this to be an extreme violation of the earth, and fight avidly against military expansion and training. On the other hand, there are many in the military that find the protection of the environment to be beneath them, and focus solely on the readiness of their troops, while others believe the military has a responsibility to use their platform to show the general population how to better coexist with nature. Looking at the two extreme viewpoints in this debate, the arguments come down to having an effective military to protect the people, or having effective environmental restraints to protect the planet and nature. This debate is very large and very complex, but to simplify it, one can look at specific examples of this conflict and make an educated judgment on which side is justified in their actions. Military training operations are happening almost continuously throughout the United States of America, and this attracts attention from various groups that take issue with the manner in which training is conducted. The first area to focus on is the waters surrounding the nation. Over the decades, there have been many places that have protested military training, from Puerto Rico to Hawaii. But why would environmentalists be so concerned with military training occurring miles away from land? The answer lies beneath the waves, and the sea life that is affected, and one of the most controversial inhabitants being affected are the great mammals of the sea, such as various species of whales. In 2010, a press release from the U.S. Navy detailed plans to expand their training area around the central east coast of the U.S., as well as off the coast of Alaska, by 2010. Within the release were stipulations that environmental protection personnel had been consulted, and that, in a worst-case scenario, marine life could be temporarily affected, but would return to normal once operations were complete. This release shows the acceptance by the U.S. military that their training does affect the natural world, and steps were being taken to reduce that effect. But this release is significant as it shows control measures being implemented to help fix the issue. From this release, and only this release, it would seem that the military would be justified in their actions, but one report can be deceiving. An article in 2008 gave a similar view, but with quite different conclusions. In this article, the author observed the sacred responsibility of the military and viewed it alongside its compliance to environmental policy. Reynolds, 2008. Though understanding and respectful of the U.S. Navy's need to train, the overall conclusion was not enough was being done to control the damage caused. In the report, it was shown that the use of sonar and high explosives was detrimental to large marine mammals, causing many of them to die. Though the research could only theorize on why and how these creatures were affected, the results were damning enough, with whales of different species dying and beaching themselves in areas where naval training was being conducted. The article was very thorough in examining what was being done to prevent this type of disaster, and looked closely at guiding regulations the Navy was supposed to uphold in order to prevent these events. But overall, the consensus was that military training would have terrible effects on the local wildlife. Understanding the need for a strong military, the essential nature of training, the article sought to find a balance between the destruction and the needed operations to satisfy both parties, but both sides of the equation have much work to do to find said balance. Of course, some may find the balance an impossible goal, and instead opt for an extreme on one side or the other. The Navy has continuous operations and continues these operations daily, and one may assume that through the research and legal battles, they may have found a more acceptable solution, but a report from 2017 seems to contradict that idea. Research is still being conducted on the situation, and large cetaceans or large marine mammals such as dolphins and whales continue to die due to military training involving explosives and high-impact noises. Parsons, 2017. It has been shown that during and immediately after U.S. Navy training exercises, the occurrences of stranding or cetaceans being found dead on beaches increases drastically, though even the lack of bodies does not mean no effects have been produced. Researchers do not know the extent of the damage caused by training, but the evidence that is seen cannot be seen as coincidental. When the Navy trains using sonar and explosives, whales and dolphins die. From most reports given, it seems the U.S. Navy is not doing enough to counter the damage done by their operations, and the environmentalists should be ever more diligent in stopping these destructive practices. Looking at how Navy training affects the environment, it can be argued that military training is detrimental to the Earth, but it must be noted that the water is not the only terrain in which the U.S. military operates. Another area of hot contention is that of the Mojave Desert in California. Located on the outskirts of the Mojave Desert is Fort Irwin, a national training center. Renowned throughout the United States military ground forces, the desert environment simulates activities in the Middle East and covers a vast amount of land. Over the years, as technology has evolved, the training area has had to expand to incorporate long-distance operations, such as drone operations and long-distance radar. The main point of contention concerning this area is a single species. Though many native animals may be threatened by military operations, the one that stands above the rest is the Agassiz desert tortoise, an endangered species of tortoise that populates only certain areas of the Mojave Desert. The presence of military forces, equipment, and training has the potential to have a devastating effect on the animal already close to extinction. Over the years, there have been multiple lawsuits and threatened actions against the local governments and the U.S. military to cease expansion and operations in order to rescue the tortoises. Various groups have tried to stop the expansion of the training area, or at least stall it until a solution concerning the tortoises can be developed. In a release from the group Center for Biological Diversity, the constant legal battle is told step by step as the fight rages on. 2008. Lawsuits have been filed claiming the Army's plans for relocation of the threatened animal is insufficient and ineffective. As a result, training has been stalled, halted, or in some cases terminated until the situation can be legally resolved. Perry, 2016. In response to this, the military has worked throughout the legal system in an attempt to assuage the voice of protest. Plans have been made to relocate the creatures and, upon denial by lawsuits, revamp to incorporate new safeguards. The delay in training may be expensive, but the military is committed to expanding the training area and saving the tortoises. Service members attending training at Fort Irwin are met with signs and warnings in dealings with wildlife in the area, and training on how to operate in areas where the tortoises may be present. In addition, large sections of the training area are closed for training, as the presence of the local animals could be detrimental to both the training and the future population of the various species located within the Mojave Desert. Much like the issue with the U.S. Navy, it appears that the land-based operations must also take steps to ensure the safety of the local animal population. But unlike water operations, land-based forces have a much more varied battle space to contend with. Along with desert terrain, the land-based forces must also be prepared to fight and operate in snow, fields, valleys, and forests. One such area to look at is the motivation for this presentation. In the area around North Carolina, there are several United States military installations, most notably Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune. The woodlands surrounding these military training grounds are home to the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. Being two of the larger United States military training grounds, is also home to extensive occupation by training military forces, primarily the Army and the Marines. The argument stems from the endangered nature of this bird, as well as the limited areas that these birds can reside within, with the military training area being a primary home. Military operations have said to have negatively impacted the species by destroying the necessary resources needed to thrive, such as certain trees where the birds make their homes, Delaney, 2011, but also by the nature of military training being loud and intrusive. As a result, there have been reports that the population of the woodpecker has sharply declined. Besides the presence of humans scaring away birds from potential feeding grounds and nesting grounds, the destruction of resources can lead to starvation, or the population moving to other areas where there are no necessary resources to survive. Additional reports have reported on the conflict between ideologies of military members and environmentalists. While the military claims that the conservation of the species is important, there are those within the organization that disagree, with some leaders stating, environmental restrictions on training forces are forcing them to go into battle with inexperienced forces. Colling, 2002. Efforts have been made on both sides, but both sides remain divided on whether enough is being done or not enough. Seeing how opinions differ on both sides of the equation, how can the issue be resolved? The answer is through the use of wildlife managers. In any debate, emotion and personal bias plays a role, and those emotional feelings can get in the way of the truth. The only real option when looking for a solution is to look to the scientific method and look purely at the facts of the matter. One way to help in this debate is to look at the research conducted by scientists in the realm of wildlife management and environmental conservation. In all areas that I presented earlier, there have been scientific experiments conducted to determine the validity of the statements given. Though some scientists cater to money and are biased by their employers, it is usually still a better method of research than pure conjecture and feelings, as in most cases, scientific research can be analyzed, and faults in the methodology can be discovered. Looking at the areas stated earlier, there's a study on marine mammals and their relationship to naval training. A study conducted between 2011 and 2013 off the coast of Hawaii gives an interesting take on the debate. Looking at the population of species of beaked whales, which are said to be highly affected by naval training, the results were inconclusive. Manzano, 2016. Though the research showed a drop in numbers of whales during and after naval training, there is no proof that the training was the cause of the lower population, taking into account that the population also drops due to temperature, conditions, and seasons. Along with this data, there is no shown increase of whales dying on the beaches, or elsewhere for that matter. The conclusion of the study showed that there could very well be a link to the use of sonar and explosives and a decrease in population, but there is no definitive proof. It can also be argued that protocols enacted by the Navy may be working in reducing the impact to the environment. Though this report does not clear the U.S. Navy of its responsibility to the marine life, it shows that there is progress. There is also potential that the other reports that detail massive death counts on behalf of the Navy may be exaggerated. Moving to the Mojave Desert, the battle over the Agassiz tortoise, a study was conducted in 2010 to determine the validity of the claims that the military is being careless in dealing with the threatened species. Berry, 2013. In a study conducted within the confines of the Mojave Desert, in areas reserved for troop movement and training, scientists set out to determine the cause of the decline of the tortoise. The overwhelming evidence from found carcasses showed that the majority of tortoises that had died had been victims of natural predation by various other carnivorous species in the area, primarily large mammals and avian predators. There was evidence to support the theory that man-made obstacles such as roads and buildings played a role in the decline, but the impact was deemed negligible, as the primary threats were all naturally occurring. Additionally, the mission of the military to relocate the tortoises away from human populations and dangerous training environments was seen as beneficial as opposed to counterproductive. When looking at the situation in North Carolina and the red-cockaded woodpecker, the research is much more conclusive. Looking at the totality of the situation, the military comes up on top in this area. Looking at the history of the population of these woodpeckers, the military had known of their presence for decades, had already implemented control measures to protect the species and the environment before even knowing of their importance. As land space is finite, the military realized the need to preserve the land already owned, and take care of it to ensure future generations of service members being able to train there, and as a result took great care to preserve the trees and natural environment in their purview. Paulisczak, 2002. This care and attention to natural preservation was actually an important factor in the population of the red-cockaded woodpecker. The areas around military training areas were actually the prime location for these endangered birds, not despite a military presence, but because of it. The care taken in preserving the natural habitats were so much greater than that of civilian landowners that the birds relocated themselves to the military-controlled areas, seeing that their habitats and themselves would be better protected. Pressure by environmentalists to do more could have been ignored when looking at this fact, but instead, the military has paused training operations several times in the past to implement stricter controls to further protect the area and the inhabitants. In other research in North Carolina, a study was conducted to see the effect of loud noises and human presence on other animals inhabiting the area, namely black bears. In a primary study of the forest around Camp Lejeune, the bear population was tracked before, during, and after training exercises involving large numbers of Marines and loud explosions. Paulisczak, 2006. The evidence showed the movement of individual bears in the area, and the results were conclusive. The bears mostly ignored the presence of humans, and the loud noises had little to no observable effects. Instead, the bears moved from location to location based off of food resources with little regard to military training. This seems to be the trend throughout the military installations, prompting an article by National Geographic to look into the claims. Ward, 2015. It was found that on military reservations, the number of endangered inhabitants thriving far exceed the number of those within the National Park Service. The conservation effort is so successful that the military installations have started exporting endangered species to other areas to increase the range of different species, and those that remain are cared for and continue to thrive under military stewardship. In a few cases, it was found that the military conservation efforts are the driving force behind keeping certain species alive, with over 90% of one threatened fish species' global population residing solely within the confines of a military reservation. The debate is a passionately heated one, with both sides showing signs of stubbornness and exasperation at the other side. But through wildlife management, a clearer picture emerges. Through scientific research, it is possible to see several key points. Though one study of naval operations claims little to no effect, there are many others that contradict this study. This could be due to many factors to include location, control measures, or many other things. Looking at the whole picture, there is overwhelming evidence that supports naval training has a negative impact on the environment it operates within, though the exact extent is unknown. Conversely, evidence for land-based operations seems to show the opposite. Though many groups have claimed that the military is causing irreparable damage to the environment and the species within, research and studies do not support this claim. Other studies have shown that the steps the military takes in order to preserve their training area is actually beneficial to not just the environment, but also to the animals within. It is easy for the detractor to find a single carcass injured or killed by the military during training operations, to assume that all animals in the area are suffering. But when research is conducted, it shows that the negative effects caused by the military is in sharp decline compared to outside the military reservation, and animals are actually safer when residing within controlled military environments. The military can still do more to preserve the environment and the wildlife, and in certain areas, such as the oceans, much work needs to be done. But overall, the military is far superior to the average civilian in fighting for the preservation of the planet and all creatures within. On a personal note, I have seen this firsthand around the world. Leaders who passionately fight for the earth, who fight against the apathy or dismissal of protection protocols for the sake of convenience or training. Regulations that aim to change the mindset of those who operate in these environments and to restrict damaging practices. There are even training sessions designed for the sole purpose of teaching service members about the importance of conservation and the role they play in it. It is vital for national security to have a trained and ready fighting force that can conquer any enemy in any environment. But the earth is not that enemy, and the military has learned to accomplish their goals without creating undue harm. As technology advances, so do restrictions and guidelines on how to operate ethically and responsibly.